Hello, this is Michael Tracy, and it's time for another homework assignment. This one will start getting in to prepare you for the discussion about what happened after the storm hit in 1996. And one key piece of that discussion is something I will refer to as Beidleman's choice. And this refers to the deliberate decision by Neal Beidleman to lead his group off the route on the descent when they were just a very short distance from the camp. This is John Krakauer's presentation of Beidleman's decision.
And 11 climbers got down to here, and they coalesced under the leadership of Neal Beidleman. They're from two different expeditions, from Scott's group and Rob's group, including two of my teammates, Beck Weathers and Yasko Namba. And Neal didn't know how he was going to get him down this steep ice, so he decided he did a smart thing. He didn't think he'd get him down safely, so he did an end run way around here. But when he started to come back, it was blowing too hard, and they couldn't see their own feet. And the blowing snow into their faces, because they're facing the wind to get back, felt like a sandblaster. And then they got lost and didn't know where they were and almost walked off the Kangshung face.
Now, the main reason I'm giving this homework assignment at this point in time is that a number of people have asked about a 2020 interview Neal Beidleman did that is available on YouTube. In that interview, Beidleman has a very different version of things than appear in Krakauer's Into Thin Air or Boukreev's The Climb. So this homework will work on the ability to deal with disparate information sources, and the assignment will focus on 3 clips from the Beidleman interview. And I'll leave it to you to work out which version you believe, but without saying which one corresponds to which account, I will note that I chose these 3 clips because for one of them, I believe the account in Boukreev's The Climb is more accurate. For another, I believe the account in Krakauer's Into Thin Air is more accurate. And for the third, I believe the statements made by Beidleman in his interview are the most accurate. So Krakauer's presentation of Beidleman's choice largely reflects what is in his book. Boukreev's The Climb has a much more detailed analysis of it, as it has the full transcript of Beidleman discussing his entire thought process. That entire piece is far too long for this video, but this is the key section. This is Beidleman talking. My intention was not to walk directly towards Camp 4, that's South Col, even though for 1 minute at the bottom of the fixed lines I knew the direction to it because of the fact that the rope gave a line that I could follow. What I wanted to do was side hill on the left a bit. I'd looked at the terrain from up above before the storm came in and made a decision that if the storm came, that the best thing to do would be to avoid the Lhotse face and that precipice as much as possible. So in both Into Thin Air and The Climb, Beidleman made a deliberate decision to deviate to the skier's left on the descent. Whether this was or was not a good decision is not really the point of this homework assignment. But in the Millhouse podcast interview, he has a completely different version and just says they were blown off course by the wind. The whole scouting it out from above before the storm hit and then deliberately deviating is completely gone.
And you don't know where you are because it's just years of people camping in different places, and it's dark and the wind's just howling. You're in a ground blizzard and there's no rope. So we're kind of blind navigating back in the direction that we thought the camp was. And the wind's pushing to one side. So kind of in retrospect, of course, it's obvious, but the wind kind of kept pushing us down.
Off the line.
Downwind. Yeah, exactly. Off the line. And we ended up going the right distance, but we're several hundred yards, to the left of where the camp was. And we can't find the camp. We know we're on the South Col. We're not lost per se, but we've lost the tents.
Right. So did Beidleman just forget about his decision from 24 years earlier? Had he not been asked about it in previous interviews? And why didn't the person conducting the interview spot this rather glaring discrepancy? The person doing the interview knew a whole lot about Sandy Pittman, but was not able to spot that Beidleman's major leadership decision for May 10th was completely replaced by simply being blown off course by the wind. So I'll let you sort that one out. This next clip is of Beidleman describing Boukreev's initial attempt to climb back up the mountain as part of the rescue efforts.
And Anatoly was there. He was, he had gotten down to the camp early by himself, and he tried to mount a couple attempts to go back out to carry oxygen back up and meet people. But the storm was so bad, even Anatoly, world-class climber, he couldn't even leave the camp.
Is that accurate? It certainly isn't what Krakauer wrote. This is from Into Thin Air. Around 7:30 p.m., Boukreev left Camp 4 to search for the group regardless. By then, he recalled, visibility maybe a meter. It disappeared altogether. I had a lamp. I began to use oxygen to speed up my ascent. I was carrying 3 bottles. I tried to go faster, but visibility was gone. It was like being without eyes, being able to see. It was impossible to see. This is very dangerous because one can fall into a crevasse. One can fall toward the southern side of, let's say, 3,000 meters straight down. I tried to go up. It was dark. I could not find the fixed line. Some 600 feet above the Col, Boukreev recognized the futility of his effort and returned to the tents. But he admits he very nearly became lost himself. In any case, it was just as well that he abandoned his rescue effort because at that point his teammates were no longer on the peak above where Boukreev had been headed. By the time he gave up his search, Beidleman's group was actually wandering around on the Col 600 feet below the Russian. But is Krakauer's account accurate? For homework, you can read Boukreev's account in The Climb and try to piece together what really happened. Look at where do Boukreev and Krakauer's accounts differ. And clearly Krakauer could only have got this portion of the account from Boukreev, so why is Boukreev's account in The Climb so vague as to the time he first left South Col? And why does Beidleman completely contradict both Into Thin Air and The Climb? What about this particular piece is such a problem for the Mountain Madness team? Well, I sort of told you when I read Krakauer's account. Krakauer was smart enough to spot it immediately, but why would Beidleman say what he did in his interview? Was it simply a faulty memory? This would not be something that either Krakauer or Beidleman would be remembering. Neither of them saw where Boukreev went on his first climb out of the camp. So why are there 3 different versions of what could only have come from one person telling the story? And why does each version of that story support that person's narrative of what was happening at that point in time? You can also look and see if this is a pattern with either Krakauer, Boukreev, or Beidleman. That when their memories differ from the photographs or other people's recollections, is that always in their favor? Moving on to the third piece of the interview, and there are numerous other inconsistencies, but I will not cover them for this homework assignment. I'm just going to look at these major 3. The final piece is...
we get to the South Summit. People are about out of oxygen. The timing is really late, so the reserve bottles that had been set there had been grabbed by people that needed oxygen. There was no coordination anymore about whose bottles were whose and whether or not it was, it was a free-for-all for the oxygen. And not all the bottles were there. I made 2 people exchange bottles.
And this is something I think most people say, well, yeah, duh, of course. And yet Krakauer says there were no problems with missing bottles. I'll get into what Krakauer's account is in the video about South Summit, but what about Beidleman's account goes so much against Krakauer's narrative? Boukreev mentions the issue of the missing bottles in The Climb, but just in a footnote saying that some of the oxygen was not accounted for, but it doesn't make up any part of his analysis. And looking over at the Wikipedia page, the issue of missing oxygen is not mentioned. There are some statements about not enough oxygen being brought up, but nothing about the oxygen that was brought up having gone missing. And this would be expected, as Wikipedia is supposed to draw from published sources, and none of the published sources focused on this rather critical issue. So what about this incident is so against Krakauer's narrative that he won't even touch it? How does this relate to the theft of gear that occurred earlier in the expedition, also completely unmentioned by Krakauer? So that should give you plenty of material to discuss. For extra credit, you can find additional discrepancies in the Beidleman interview and look at how much is the host telling his audience what they want to hear rather than simply asking questions and letting Beidleman tell his own version of what happened. As a final note, there is a difference in the pronunciation of Jasko Namba's name between Beidleman and Krakauer, as Beidleman didn't really know Jasko, and as she was on the Adventure Consultants team with John Krakauer, Krakauer's pronunciation is the one that I will use, and the U is silent.
Rob Hall, leader. Lou Kosiski, a 53-year-old attorney from Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. Frank Fishbeck, a publisher from Hong Kong. Mike Groom, guide from Brisbane, Australia. And Jasko Namba, client from Japan.